Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 3 p.m. panel, The Effects of Analytics on Sports. It is my honor to introduce the moderator of this panel, Professor Chris Marsh.
Hi, good afternoon. If I have never met you, my name is Marsh, and I teach advertising and public relations and sports communication in the greatest department of communication in the world. And I am thrilled that you are all here to see this particular panel. I want to take care of one really quick reminder. This will be the last panel of the daytime for the Steiner Sports Symposium, but come back right here at 6 o'clock from 6 to 6:30. Dr. Andrew Billings is going to be the Robeson lecturer. Dr. Andrew Billings right down there. His lecture, which is going to be absolutely amazing, is called Changing Fields, How Sports Discrimination Moved from Systems to Screens. So please make sure that that's in your calendar, and we'll see you back here at 6 p.m. Now, it is my honor, and I've been so excited to introduce you to three of my fantastic new friends and a very special old friend. And so I'm going to start right here on my right. This is Dr. Courtney Cox. Dr. Cox is an associate professor in the Department of Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies at the University of Oregon. Her research examines issues related to identity, technology, and labor through sports and wine. Her book, Double Crossover, Gender, Media, and Politics in Global Basketball, considers how black women and non-binary athletes maneuver through this global sports media complex. She's also co-director of The Sound of Victory, a multi-platform project located at the intersection of music, sound, and sport. She previously worked for ESPN. She has also been with the Longhorn Network, the NPR affiliate KPCC, that's in Pasadena, California, as a matter of fact, and the WNBA's Los Angeles Sparks. Please welcome Dr. Courtney Cox. Dr. Samir Deshpande is an assistant professor in statistics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He earned his PhD in the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Before there, he trained at MIT. His research interests include, and he taught me how to pronounce this, Bayesian hierarchy modeling, Bayesian tree regression, and variable selection and causal inference. If you look that stuff up, it is fascinating. Much of his research is motivated by a long-running collaboration that seeks to understand the long-term health risks and benefits of playing sports in adolescence. His applied sports analytics work includes computing how NBA players contribute to their team's chances of winning, quantifying the value of pitch framing, plate discipline, and the third time through the order penalty in Major League Baseball. He was named a finalist in the 2019 NFL Big Data Bowl and received the 2021 Significant Contributor Award from the Sports in Statistics section of the American Statistical Association. He is a long-suffering fan of Dallas professional sports teams and can often be spotted wearing a giant Texas belt buckle. Please welcome Dr. Samir Deshpande. Katie Krall is an adjunct professor at Northwestern University, teaching courses on sports finance, front office operations, and organizational theory and leadership. She is also an on-air talent for the Marquee Sports Network, home of who? The Chicago Cubs. Thank you very much. Combining her experiences on the field and in a front office for segments on defensive positioning, hitting technology, and building projection models. She previously was the senior product manager of global baseball strategy at Hawkeye Innovations, where she spearheaded development of new products that leveraged biomechanics, player tracking, bat, speed, and ball flight data. She spent 2022 as a development coach with the Boston Red Sox, where she oversaw pitch design, advanced scouting, and integrating data into player plans. She was also part of the global strategy team at Google after 2 seasons with the Cincinnati Reds as a baseball operations analyst, a position that combined the worlds of roster construction, analytics, and scouting. Please welcome Katie Krall. Chris Kwasinski is a digital sports reporter and producer for Fox 32 Chicago. He mainly covers the Chicago Bulls, but expands to cover most of the professional and collegiate sports teams in Chicago. Now, during this time, spending the majority of his time covering the Chicago Cubs. In his time at Fox, Chris has helped chronicle the arrival of Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson in his first 2 seasons covering the Bears. He also produces live-streamed and podcast-style sports content, while also writing stories and columns for the Fox Chicago website. Chris attended the very first Charley Steiner Symposium in 2015 and is thrilled, as I am, to have him to be back here as a panelist. He graduated from Bradley in 2016 with a degree in sports communication and a social media marketing minor. He was the sports editor for the campus newspaper The Scout, where he won multiple ICPA awards for his work. He also has a Master's of Science in Journalism from Northwestern and has worked, his career has taken him to jobs in Mississippi, Utah, and Missouri in various reporting and editing roles before coming home to Chicago. Please welcome back Chris Kwiecinski. All right. So I asked the panelists if they would please, when they came back to visit, if they would bring something, a token, an image, an artifact that they would have at their office, or something that sort of embodies their passion for what they study, what they do in data analytics and sport. And then I asked them to bring it and display it, and perhaps kind of talk about it, just to kick us off with a little bit of show and tell. Dr. Cox, could I ask you, if you wouldn't mind, we'll just go down the line from there.
Sure. Yeah, I don't want to follow Katie. I already feel strongly about it. So I will say, one of the things, there are a lot of cool things. I was coming from Portland, and I just grabbed something, the first thing I thought about when you gave this fantastic prompt. So I have this bag. It's just classic Adidas, kind of like, if you've played any kind of travel team, it has like the embroidered team. This is AAU team. But I want to tell a really quick story about this simple Adidas bag that's like one of my treasured possessions. So when I was in grad school, I did dissertation research across the US, Russia, and France, following women's basketball players as they were maneuvering their labor around the world. And one of my participants, Sierra, live with here, was one of the folks that was really helpful for me. I met her when she was a rookie. She had just been drafted, and she was starting to tell me already about how she had signed this contract overseas to play in Naples, Italy. And so I was like, ooh, Italy sounds like a cute research site. I could see myself doing that. And so when I got ready to start my research, I reached out to her. We did another interview. I was like, I'm ready to go wherever you go. She's like, I just signed in Russia, which is how I ended up in Russia. And so when I go out to meet her, it's like a 24-hour trip to get to the town where she lives in Russia. This is 2018, so we can talk about BG elsewhere if you want. This is before Brittany Griner is detained. In Russia, but we're there, and I'm waiting at the turnstile, like when you're waiting for your baggage, and everyone else gets their bag, and I've traveled 24 hours from Los Angeles, and my bag is missing. Like, there is no luggage, and the luggage has everything except for what I'm wearing, and I'm going from LA to Russian winter. And so Sierra, as one of my participants, I always hold this near and dear because she took me to IKEA Mall, which is a mall in Russia, in Kazan, where we were, and IKEA Mall, because there was an IKEA in this mall, and they had an H&M, and so if anything else is like a familiar thing, you're like so far from home. We go to H&M, I stock up on the basics. 4 days later, we're in the gym, my bag just appears. So I have all these extra clothes, and so anyway, I ended up with an extra bag to take home all of my H&M goods after my luggage arrived. And so I tried to give this back to her recently when she came for one of my book talks. And she was like, no, this is yours forever. And so anyway, I'm afraid to take it anywhere because people will call me Sierra. And I also don't want it to get messed up. So I brought this bag because my participants have taken care of me, taken care of each other over the years. And so I always think fondly about this, maybe almost losing my bag in Russia. And then it just showing up. No one had a story for what happened. The bag just showed, all the stuff was in there. Anyway, so this is my little goodie bag.
Thank you.
How do I follow that? So my artifact, in full disclosure, I got Marcia's email after I was on the plane, so got time to really think, and so it's my Wisconsin hat. And the short version about why it's important to me is I come to workshops, I do all of this, and I grew up in Texas, and I'm super proud of it, and have a giant belt buckle. Usually I have my boots, usually I have a hat, and eventually my dean kind of walked up to me one day and said, you know, like, it's great that you're proud of where you're from, but you're also representing the University of Wisconsin, and why don't you put on some Wisconsin gear? And so, to paraphrase that great American statesman, I wear it so I don't get fired. But in reality, it sort of reminds me of who I represent and what I do, and I sort of strongly believe in the Wisconsin idea and developing things that benefit not only the university, but the state and the world at large. And so it's kind of a good reminder of that.
Nice. So when Marsh described the prompt, I thought, oh, like you want a Horcrux. That's what you're looking for, right? And so what I chose, this is, it's a Katie Crawl bobblehead, and it was passed out in 2023 as part of a Women in Sports Night. So like Marsh said, I used to coach for the Red Sox. And the reason why I chose it is because I had a business school professor. I got my MBA at the University of Chicago. And near the end of class, one day, he turned to all of us and he said, none of you are going to ever be anything. Which it was like a pretty strong sentiment, considering there were people in the room who like worked for Goldman Sachs and who were, consultants at McKinsey and Bain. And so he calls everybody a failure. And he said, you're going to be a failure if all you care about is getting the country club membership and getting the signing bonus, and if your why is simply like pursuing that financial or that status-driven goal. And he said, you really need to find out what moves you, and everything needs to come from there. And so for me personally, it begins and ends with the advancement of women in sports. Like everything that I do, every article, every conference, it actually has nothing to do with me. Like my name might be on this bobblehead, my name might be in the program today. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the women in this audience who are going to leave here because they heard me speak, they heard Courtney speak, they saw Katie moderate, and they think, oh wow, there's a place for me. Or whatever I was debating pursuing, I now feel empowered to do that. And the women who have come up to me who now work for the Padres and the Orioles because they read an article or their dad sent them a podcast that I was on, and that spurred them to go forward in their career, like that's the legacy that matters to me. That's why I chose this today, because it is my obligation and my responsibility to ensure that the next generation feels like they can take that step. And that's next to like winning a World Series ring. I think that is probably what I am most concerned about moving forward when I think about my career.
It is a very difficult act to follow. I decided to bring up a pair of binoculars. And this kind of starts 10 years ago when I was a senior at Bradley here. And Chris mentioned that I was the sports editor for the Bradley Scout. And that's where my career really began. And the one thing that this represents to me is a lens to view things through. And the most important part about sports, at least from my angle as a storyteller, is you all view it through whatever lens that you choose to view it through. And I've been lucky to view a lot of sports and not just Bradley athletics. My senior year here, Bradley basketball won 5 games. There wasn't much good basketball, but it was basketball the same. I had a courtside seat, and that to me meant everything. And I was able to take those experiences from this specific room. I remember sitting in that corner with the Com 101 class being like, this is a lot. It's where I met some of my best friends and the support systems that still help drive me today. And that's where I get the latest lens that I bought in September of 2025 before the Bear season began, because I don't know if most of you guys know, it's really cool to watch sporting events. I know the only issue is that sometimes they put you up in the heavens, so you have to find ways to view it. This is my way to view it, but my lens also goes through how I write, how I report, how I view things, how I portray things, and a lot of those lenses were formed here in this room. It's a kind of a cool full circle moment for me, so thank you.
Chris, you're gonna get the first at bat for the next question, and we're gonna start off first with just an operating definition of data analytics. Data analytics is the collection, the processing and interpretation of raw statistical data to create actionable insights that improve athletic performance, inform in-game strategies, and guide personnel decisions. And that's great. But like Dr. Billings was saying this morning, we are not just interested in sport. We don't just care passionately about sport. We care about sport and short form narration. We care about sport and player development. We care about sport and broadcasting and storytelling and so forth. So it's not just data analytics. Back to my question. So in the variety of different perspectives that our panelists represent and how you view sport and the intersection of sport and data analytics, I'm going to ask you all, if given your particular area of that field, if you could describe it with a film title, a song title, a television program, any type of cultural artifact, give me a title for what you see right now and why that particular title.
No, Mr. Marsh, we just talked about this last night on the car ride home, but I'm gonna actually double back and use the same song that I used whenever we were talking about it last night. It's the song Vehicle by Ides of March. And there's a headline out of that is, it's your vehicle, baby, it can take you anywhere you want to go. That's where analytics is for me specifically.
Gosh, I don't know. I think, like, philosophically, data integration is to make more informed decisions, right? Like if Samir is building a player projection model to know how much we should sign this player for and for how long, that's like a recommendation based on historic information in order to anticipate future performance. As a Cubs fan, right, who grew up in the era of like Tony Campana and like Jeff Samardzija and those like really fallow 2010 years, I think sports are waiting for Godot. Like I think there is this like existentialism within sports with this like promise of a potential better tomorrow that's never guaranteed. For those of you who slept through high school English, Waiting for Godot is this play by Samuel Beckett, and the whole thing is just basically two guys talking the whole time. It's Vladimir and Estragon, and that's the whole play. My twin sister hated it. She's like, this is a play about nothing. And at one point, there's this boy who comes. It's supposed to like also be representative of religion, right? Waiting for Godot, waiting for God. And this boy comes who is like representative of Jesus. And the boy says, like, I promise Godot is coming. And I think as a sports fan, as a Chicago sports fan, there's that promise, just wait, Godot is coming. And we believe that because I think as humans, we believe in the potential of a better tomorrow, which I think is really powerful. So that's my answer, Marsh, but it really doesn't have to do with data whatsoever.
Love it anyway. That's great. Thank you.
Went back and thought a lot, and I think I'd probably go with like The Force Awakens, because it's something that people are familiar with. It's really not a new thing. We've had data in sports and data-driven decision-making basically as long as we've had decision-making in sports. But it's kind of new, it's kind of exciting, and Disney hasn't ruined it yet. So I think that kind of plays into it.
I love that. Okay, so there's two directions I think that my work goes when I'm studying technology in sport, coming from a previous behind the camera media technology job, working in both production and directing. I think the film, this is super obvious, it's The Matrix. I use Jean Baudrillard in my work to think about the simulation of sport, all the things that are mapped on top of live sport, the ways we talk about sport, the media landscape. And so I think about the simulation, the world outside of it. There is the very real experience of sport, but all the things that we put on top, whether we're talking about sports gambling, whether we're talking about sport docuseries, this kind of remaking of what happened. And then I also thought, because you brought up musicals yesterday, and so I was thinking about a song, and the song would be from Hamilton, The Room Where It Happened. And so I think about these rooms where things are happening. People are making predictive technology decisions, health decisions about athletes' lives. And so as someone that studies labor and technology together, I'm always interested in where athletes get to come into the conversation, where folks that are studying this, have studied this, have PhDs in statistics are coming to the conversation, how we're keeping athletes safe, how we're keeping their technology safe, their biometric data protected. And so I think about rooms where things happen and people make important decisions about the lives of fans, athletes, et cetera, and where our data goes. And so those are my two.
Thank you very much. That was outstanding. Okay, I gotta say, I mean, you absolutely just clobbered the first two warm-up rounds. Like, I knew that you
Those are the warm-ups?
Those are the warm-ups.
Marsh.
Those are the warm-ups.
Shut it down,
Okay.
let's go.
Now here, all right, so here it is. What I'd like to know is the headline. For each one of your particular perspectives, your approaches, and how you use and find the value in in data, what is the headline for the biggest issue at the intersection of data analytics and sports? And at this point, I will just open it up to the floor.
The biggest issue.
I don't know if it's an issue per se, but where I see the field heading, and Samir and I discussed this yesterday, in baseball in particular, I think the stratification actually is more of a cluster, right? Like you've got the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Rays at the top, you've got a handful of teams at the bottom, but even they have the self-awareness to know how far behind they are, and then there's like this really robust middle class. So I don't think it's really hands-on keyboard. I think the headline that I would use is conduits wanted. Like if I can have people who can be in uniform, who can go to a player and who can articulate what he or she needs to do to get better, that's the most important person in my organization. I'm at a point where I have the player projection model, I have a draft model, I have injury monitoring tools, right? Like I have all of those resources. It's then a question of how do I put that between the lines? Because if I'm not making a player better, then my model is useless. And I think those individuals who are comfortable interfacing with players and who are also able to like sit through sprint planning and go through code review, when you can marry both of those worlds, I think you have like really exceptional human beings.
Well, just to piggyback off of that, it's sort of the big elephant in the room is, you know, we're awash with data, and this is for many reasons. I mean, there's been a revolution in sport technology and media technology. We're measuring more things about players than even in the last 3 years that we couldn't even conceive of 10 years ago. And so you have this big problem that professional teams and collegiate teams too are facing, is that they're getting a lot of information and a lot of data and a lot of streams, and they don't know what to do with it. And as an educator, like we don't teach our students necessarily how to deal with data, right? We have landmarks, 19 landmarks on the player's body 10 times a second, every player on the field. That is not something you can crack open a textbook and figure out, oh, for these data you use these methods. So there's like a big research component to that. And so I think the problem that a lot of teams have solved, and you sort of kind of alluded to it maybe 5-10 years ago, they realized we're getting all of this data, we're on this crest of this revolution, and we need to build out staffs and we need to build out organizations to just wrap our arms around it. And now taking that second step of leveraging that and finding the talent that kind of knows how to work with these data, can ask interesting questions, and can communicate with non-technical people, that's really where the challenges in sports analytics is. It's not the technical training, it's the interfacing. It's how do I take something that came out of a model that I built. I'll push back a little bit on your characterizing models as useless if it doesn't improve a player. Like the model can only be so good, but you have to have that dialogue and players and coaches and analysts willing to talk to each other and recognize what they know and what they don't know, and recognize there are many ways to improve performance. And so it's a lot of teamwork, it's a lot of interpersonal skills. If you talk to hiring managers now, they say all of our candidates, we get thousands of resumes, they all clear the technical bar. It's the high EQ individuals, it's the people who can work on diverse teams that really stand out. And so that's really the top line of where this next wave of analytics is going to, or what we should be selecting for.
Okay, so I'm gonna follow in this vibe, especially as someone who deeply believes in communication. I feel like this is the audience, the crowd that might move with me. I don't know if the headline is like talk to me, but what I have noticed as someone who has sat in labs and watched deeply quantitative scholars, I would say I'm a mixed method scholar. But in terms of someone that is primarily trained as a qualitative scholar, I sit and watch people engage within labs, within teams, within workouts, right? And so a lot of times what I'm learning as I talk to folks and watch them in space is about these communication breakdowns. We have incredibly smart folks that are sitting and thinking about predictive technology. They are trying to make sure we pick the right people. We're trying to make sure we prevent injuries and illness, like important stuff's happening. But then there's these breakdowns in communication when coaches do not like to be coached. And I've learned that in my time when I was working at ESPN, dealing with coaches, former coaches turned analysts, or when I'm in these spaces now. And so to give you a tennis in case you want it, Marsh, I know you're looking for that.
He'll take it.
I tore my ACL trying to play tennis. And I tore my ACL meniscus, and as someone that has been around athletes rehabbing this injury, it's very different on the other side. And so I've been working with folks, and we know that there's a lot of data we've collected on who tends to have ACL tears, how recovery happens, how do we get people back. And if you've had a favorite athlete or someone on your team that's torn their ACL, it's a gnarly thing to recover from. We know for a fact that this becomes very gendered very quickly, especially when we think about certain sports. And so I have, one of my PTs was actually telling me it's not just about things you've heard about, hormonal fluctuation, menstrual cycles. We can't do load management if the championship happens on your period. You just can't, you're gonna play. But there are all these other things we know about how we jump, lift, move. We have all the science. We actually know if we had people doing FIFA 11, which has been told like this will help prevent ACL tears, especially at the high school level, especially teenagers who have these really sometimes career-ending injuries. I bring the ACL thing up to say, FIFA 11 could be the answer. It could at least minimize how many ACL tears we see, especially at high school and college level. But the communication to coaches who have always coached this way, we always do this. So the data, the science, the technology is there to try to mitigate all of this stuff. But if we don't have the communication, I think that's where communication scholars, where journalists can help us with telling those stories and also bridging those gaps. So I think before I used to be like, I don't know if comm scholars have a space in these labs, in these rooms, in these analytics departments, but I do think we have a role. So even if you don't consider yourself quantitative, I think learning that language is the easy thing. I think translating that and making sure we can all be on the same page. Because I'm sitting in PT and I'm washed. Like my tennis career might be over, Marsh. I don't know if I want to do it anymore. But I'm in there with a lot of high school athletes, a lot of soccer players, a lot of football players, and I want to see them get back, but I also want to see fewer of them in there. And so I think about that a lot of where that communication can, that's the biggest issue across no matter what technology we're implementing. If we're not having that conversation effectively, it's not going to help anyone.
Not at all.
Chris?
So I can take this a little bit of a different path. I think the headline I'd like to choose is just follow the yellow brick road. And your guys are talking about analytics in terms of communicating that, it's in terms of finding athletes and developing players. And the way that I use analytics on a daily basis stems from the storytelling aspect of it, which is I have, excuse me, my different websites, my different analytical components like Chartbeat, Parsley that I've used in the past. And these are the things that help me decide what am I going to write about. These are the things that decide what are people interested in. And this kind of stems from every one of my stops from Mississippi to Utah to Missouri to now in Chicago as well, where the audiences vary obviously by the market size. And obviously in Oxford, Mississippi, everybody cares about Ole Miss football, as opposed to Chicago, where there's everything everywhere all at once. It's also a fantastic movie. But I think in this specific vein is when you guys are talking about the analytics of describing what goes into making an athlete, what goes into developing a player, what goes into making these really difficult decisions in the room where they all happen. We're talking about how do I tell that story? And I have to figure out ways to do that. And analytically, it could come down to how I write that story or how I talk about that story. Maybe it's a podcast as opposed to 1,000 or 2,000 word written story. And there's different mediums and different ways that you can attack this. And it all comes down to what works. And I can look at Chartbeat for now, and I see, okay, well, today is Thursday, and 2 weeks from now, the NFL draft is happening. So obviously, more people want to read about the NFL draft. And even then, it comes off of, we were talking about the last panel, the transfer portal. People want to know what's going on, who's in there, what's happening. It's a good question, I don't know. But I think in this specific vein, where if you can communicate a lot of these things, development in different stories, player advancement, that kind of stuff, you'll see that reflected in the analytics of people are reading these stories, people are digesting this information properly. And it's a good way of figuring out how people, or how well people are digesting it if I'm telling the story well enough. And for TV stations like myself, that goes into engage time. What's the average amount of time people are taking in this podcast or this story? And I was using that back in newspapers as well, but in newspapers, the other analytic that I don't use nowadays anymore is subscriptions. How many people are subscribing to read my stories? And those numbers drive what you do. They drive what kind of stories you tell. It drives what you put all of your hard-earned money into, and it tells you what to stay away from. Or it tells you if you're doing a good enough job or a bad enough job. And it just depends on how you view a lot of those things and through what lens you view them through.
Thank you. And for each one of your answers, it really, again, kind of reflects the diverse use and value and all the cool things that you can do with data and so forth. Now, let's flip this over. Where are there areas of concern to you from your perspective in terms of how data may be analytically used, or perhaps, if not saying misused, not used to its fullest potential?
How long do we have?
How much time you got?
Well, Dr. Billings doesn't speak till 6. I can call in for some pizza. And
No.
All right, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think there's several issues, right? There's, especially when you think about, like, just by a show of hands, how many of you are wearing like a smartwatch or like a thing that tells you like what your heart rate is or how many steps you're taking, right? Mm-hmm. So most of our college athletes, especially at big programs, we got monitors on them all day during all practices. We know so much about them. And I think there's some serious questions, and I know we talked a little bit about this yesterday about who gets to use these data and what do we get to use these for. We took two of our student athletes went to the NFL Combine, and we have all this. We have 4 years of health data for them. If a professional team comes and asks us, do we hand that over to them? Do we not? Like, who gets to own that? Those are complicated questions about just the data that we're collecting. It's now that we have all of the biomechanics data at the professional level in baseball, do we bring in all of the biomechanical measurements to arbitration or when we're negotiating a new contract? There's questions about how we use these data, but I think another issue that's related is, and is sort of, Chris, you sort of touched on it, there's different things you can do with data and different metrics, different models you can build that have different purposes. There's some statistics that are really retrospective. They're telling us what happened. There are also the prospective and predictive ones that might tell us what we could do, and I think where a lot of teams and analysts make a mistake is not being careful about the distinction. So in some of my work on catcher framing, right, this phenomenon of catchers being able to kind of fool umpires just into calling strikes instead of balls, what we saw was that there were these eye-popping numbers of like $14 million on the open market just for how you catch 5 to 10 balls a game. And we thought, we saw teams just like signing this. So like the Molinas got a lot of money based on this. Jonathan LaCroix in Wisconsin got a lot of money out of this. And then what you find year over year is that after you develop a reputation of being a good catch framer, really delivering value to your team, umpires catch on to that. And you see this regression where elite pitch framers all of a sudden look middle of the pack and then sort of below average over the span of 2 seasons. And so it's a really good retrospective statistic, but if you forecast based on that, good luck. I mean, so understanding what your model is and what it's doing and what value it can provide and what the different statistics should be used for. A lot of the advanced metrics are great for reporting. For projecting, I don't really know. And I think that's one place where we start to see some misuse of fundamentally retrospective statistics being used for projection.
I think if you talk about projection and in a specific way, talking back in a journalism sense, what I was saying, and a little bit of using these analytics, there's one thing that I always have concerns on, is if you're dealing with decision makers, editors specifically, that have closed minds. And that is my biggest concern, is because back in 2023, I was an editor for USA Today regionally, and I was coming up with plans to cover women's basketball, specifically Mizzou women's basketball when I was in Columbia, Missouri. Also women's basketball in Missouri State, which has a following, and then elsewhere too, where I had an editor say, like, no, don't do that, because there's no audience for that. There's no audience for those teams, and especially women's basketball. And I took a step back and was like, well, you don't know that. Like, you don't know that, because if you don't try, then how are you going to know? And it's interesting that come now in 2026, after one of the most watched Final Fours in women's basketball history in college basketball, we're starting to see that rise. And the only threat, and I guess the only concern I have, is the threat of editors and decision makers that are closed-minded. If they see something not working, or that historically this hasn't worked, so let's not try it. That's the concern, because there's always going to be a way to make this work, and especially in this day and age with social media, with so many different platforms where you can access and find audiences, there's a way to do it. That's just, to me, and the concern of, are we going to give people the space to try and find these audiences, because they do exist.
to piggyback off of that, right? There's a perception that I think totally misplaced about like analytics trying to replace traditional sports intuition and sports knowledge, and that like the kids with the spreadsheets are coming to ruin sports and ruin it for the rest of us. And I feel like there's a double standard that when teams, these are big departments that are just now getting created in a lot of teams, and we kind of have this fear in the community that, okay, we only get one shot at this. If we make a decision or we recommend a decision or a player and it doesn't work out, then you're going to have a coach or a GM or an owner say, to hell with analytics. Like, it didn't work out this one time, but think about how many boneheaded decisions managers make and on the basis of this is how I've experienced the sport over so many years. So we give them a lot of leash, and it feels like analytics can only fail once. And I think that leads to a little bit of trepidation, and I don't understand the sociology of why this is. Maybe it's a new thing that people are unfamiliar with, but I do think that's related to, your editor doesn't want to try it because if this one time we tried something, it doesn't work, then we gotta sort of not try it again. And I hope that doesn't happen. So I'm like skeptical, but we'll see.
I liked both of those.
Oh no.
I think I'm gonna go off the kind of rotted data thing of like using data in a way it wasn't originally intended, right? And again, labor thing, I think about the ways you're talking about unprotected, non-unionized college players. We just had an amazing panel that dug into so much of the good stuff there, good stuff being they're good, the information is scary and sometimes not good. But when we think about athlete rights when it comes to that data collection, because we have the Apple Watch or Whoop Strap or whatever it is, we can choose to log onto Strava and log that run, which also data questions there. Don't let them know where you live. But I think the other piece of it is when there are sensors in the floor, when there's all this data collected about you, but you haven't been able to learn how to even understand this data, right? So again, room where it happened. And so I'm really interested in how we communicate to agents, how we communicate to unions. And so when I think about collective bargaining, the NBA has in their CBA that there can't be that use during free agency where athletes' data can be used to devalue what you've done, right? So if these two GMs are talking to each other and they're trying the dirty back, right? And they're like, no, you shouldn't sign them because this was this. It's like you haven't even gone through the physical, right? You haven't even gone, and they're already collecting data or saying, we've already put your data in, this is how much value you would bring to this team because we've already placed you within our system. And so when those conversations are happening and you don't even have access to your own data, let alone knowing how that data is used. And so I like that the NBA is already thinking about that's built into the CBA, but you are not protected as you're entering in. When you are going into the NBA draft, like you said, a college could be asked like, hey, will you send us this data or we'll pay you if you'll send us that. And so these transactions can be made. I think that's one of the biggest issues is like where athletes are left out. And especially if you're an athlete who your performance kind of evades statistical knowledge, like if you're a Draymond Green, right, there are certain ways that your impact can't be understood in the same kind of way. It can be understood and read, but your impact in the game is somehow kind of eludes that. You could be at a huge disadvantage, right? So I think both on the collective bargaining front, we have to make sure that's brought to the front, like we want those protections for current members, but I also worry about that college gap of like, how do we start to think about that at, whether we're thinking about our own relationship as scholars on university campuses, how can we advise provosts and presidents and ADs to think about how to protect athlete data? Because also, people that are betting on sport, that's some very valuable data, right? So also I think about hacking and protections and these outdated modes of server protections that we find on college campuses as well. So I worry about that. I lose sleep. When I pull the covers up at night, I'm thinking like, how do you protect athlete data?
So just to play devil's advocate and take a position that I don't necessarily agree with. So we have all this data, say for a college player, we have, we've got catapults, so we know their heart rate during every practice. And I can see how that is quantitatively very different than I talked to your strength and conditioning coach. But from the perspective of, so like what is the distinction between handing this like very high resolution, high frequency data, which I don't really know what people will do with it, but it feels somewhat different than talking to all of the coaches that you've interacted with over your time at a college.
Yeah.
Like that's information about you. If you hear that you dog it during weightlifting sessions, that does affect your draft status. And so how is that inherently different?
Like how is the quantitative data versus the qualitative data? in terms of not knowing what a strength and conditioning coach might have said behind
Exactly.
your back. I don't think it's different, but I think the amount that we're talking about
Okay.
that's being collected and the safety protections, which we kind of talked about yesterday about how there are these sports science labs being built on college campuses, but they don't have the correct protections that we would protect if we were doing any other institutional review board kind of data collection. And so it's not just the teams, it could be anyone that is going in and grabbing that and saying, oh, so-and-so, these numbers look like so-and-so is not going to start next week. That's going to change my parlay. And so I think I worry about it on all fronts because I don't know what the data could be in the future. So like, I think theoretically about how do we think about those protections now because we don't know what kind of data we'll be able to collect. It changes so fast. And so I hear you on that. Sometimes it's the exact same, the qualitative and the quantitative line up. Like this player, someone says the player's lazy and the numbers say, yeah, maybe so, right? But I worry about like the fact there are so many factors and so many things that it could be. And so I think big picture, even knowing that that's small, granular, it may not make too much of an impact.
Got it.
I'm going to circle back to Star Wars.
Great.
In Star Wars 4, A New Hope, Han Solo, it was the first one, Han Solo very famously says the line, never tell me the odds. We don't live in that world now. We live in a world where give me the odds on literally everything. Can you all talk about the impact and the scope of what gambling and sports gambling has done to data analytics and what data analytics has then done to sports gambling?
How much time you got?
I think philosophically, the divergence in how the leagues view gambling today versus even like 10 or 15 years ago is like pretty fascinating. So the history of gambling in baseball in particular, the reason that a commissioner's office exists is because of the 1919 Black Sox. And for a super high level overview of that, you had the Chicago White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds. The Chicago White Sox were heavily favored. They had an owner at the time, Charles Comiskey, who like penny pinched and didn't give them enough money. And so they got together and they said, if we throw the World Series and we bet on ourselves to lose, because we can control that, we know we're probably going to win, but we know come hell or high water, if we play terribly, we will lose. We're going to make, I'm going to say you're a co-conspirator in this, we're going to make more money intentionally losing than we would with the World Series share that we get from Charles Comiskey. So that happens. It's like in the Great Gatsby, a version of it, kind of like embodied by Arnold Rothstein, the gambler. So the commissioner's office gets created in Major League Baseball specifically to weed out the gambling. Pete Rose gets banned from baseball for betting on his own games. Like there are all these instances where baseball, the original sin is gambling. You can be a racist, you can be a misogynist. Ty Cobb's in the Hall of Fame, like known racist. You can be all these terrible things, but the one thing you couldn't be in baseball was a gambler. And so the fact now that there are these multi-million-dollar partnerships between Major League Baseball, between the NBA and these gambling entities, that's a seismic shift in perception. Because if you are a fan and you have $30 on a Marlins-Rockies game in April, you are infinitely more likely to watch or be invested in that game because there's money on the line. So from the league's perspective, not only are you getting a demographic that is like highly sought after, right, that 21 plus to like 45 male and female demo, but you're also getting people to tune in games that otherwise would be meaningless. So I don't know if there's like necessarily a huge impact between what front offices are doing and what gambling is. Samir and I were talking about, like, from a gambling perspective, you just have access to data that you previously never would, and so you're not just betting on did the Rockies win or did the Marlins win. You're betting on how many four-seam fastballs did Kyle Freeland throw, right? Like you can get really granular, which again enhances engagement, but I think it's super important since most of you now live in a world where gambling is ubiquitous. For a very long time, there was nothing worse to the NFL, the NBA, MLB, and NHL than gambling. Nothing worse. And now they're in bed together in this like very public way. And I think to me that is like such an inflection point in society and in sports.
But you know, you mentioned the data aspect of it, and I don't think we get to the position that we're at where you can have prop bets on in-game events and markets that resolve in a matter of seconds without the new data streams that we have, right? MLB's advanced media, when they launched the Game Day app, you had pitch by pitch data that was behind an API that my understanding was Major League Baseball made it publicly available without intending to, and then you had a bunch of people going and scraping the data in real time and being able to look at, where exactly did this pitch go, what was the speed, what was the type of pitch that you would get essentially instantaneously. Without this kind of real-time data collection and transmission, we can't have the in-game betting that we have now. So the ability to resolve markets inside of a game in the matter of seconds doesn't happen without the data collection. And now this wasn't what the data was collected for initially, but it exists, and it's a great way to monetize that feed to get it just a little bit earlier than everybody else. And so the sports books are all sort of getting their data from various sources, but that's what sort of enables it. And I think the other thing that we just have technology which makes sports betting frictionless. Just by a show of hands, how many of you use something like FanDuel or DraftKings or just a handful? Bunch of y'all
Wait, hold
are liars.
on. Are we sure?
Yeah, no, hold on.
This is a target demo. Like,
I'll just say I am forbidden from doing it as a sports reporter, so I'm cleansed here.
Wait, Courtney, can I offer an aside? And I think you should do research on this. I was at a sports analytics conference at Ohio State, and there was this study that apparently men reported their earnings as being like infinitely higher than they were in actuality. Like they lied in anonymous studies. And then women actually reported, because if you look at like what men claim that they won via sports betting, it's just like statistically impossible. But they felt like too insecure to actually admit what they lost, which I think is like such an interesting like cultural thing.
I mean, the height
Oldest
on
story in the world,
height on
but-
dating apps, like
It's a thing,
there's
I think there's something there.
The numbers do not lie,
Yeah.
we are told, but the men they do. So I think maybe Chris has me in this like narrative storytelling and like how data works. I really love that framework. I think about it as an educator, like as someone that's taught sports classes for a long time, and even like the relationship we used to have, like, students would come afterward and it would just be like, our teams are playing each other, and it's just like lovely trash talk. I love trash talk. And it's just like, who do you think is gonna win tonight, blah, 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 you think so-and-so? And we would have this lovely exchange, just how classroom exchanges would go. And now it feels like students come up to me. I caught one student once that came up to me, and if you just start a conversation that's like, what do you think about blah, blah, blah game? Are you watching this? And we're just doing that, but I realized they're like kind of taking notes. They're like, how many points do you think? How many rebounds do you? And I started realizing like, I think they're building a parlay over there. Like,
oh my gosh.
And I realized the conversation that students have with me now are about odds. It's about the certain numbers. It's about things that are not about, I love this team, I love these players, I got this feeling, I got chills, I was in the building when XYZ happened. We've kind of lost that. And I'm not trying to be overly romantic, but I think the way that we talk about sport through these odds. I remember when people were like, there's no way there will ever be a professional team in Vegas because it's just too close to the gambling. It will mar everything. And now we can't get teams to Vegas fast enough. We cannot host major things. And so I think when I'm talking to students that are in this target demo that are constantly being sold promo codes, like you can't get away from it, I worry about that, how it changes how we talk. Like this is the simulation again, like what's mapped on top of sport, because I think it's a little sad to me. Like I know I'm being old, but I'm kind of like, yeah, we can talk about gambling, we can talk about betting, but that's the only conversation we're having.
It crowds it out.
We lose it, right? I got to go first game at Wrigley Field, opening day.
This year?
Yeah.
Oh, freezing.
Terrible weather. And I'm just out there like, but the energy was like, it was like playoff energy, like opening day. And I was all these people called in sick. Like it was 120. Like, well, how is it packed? Everyone's in the building.
Don't you guys have jobs?
Yeah, I was like, and also I'm like there as well, right? And so it's like the energy was like contagious. I was like, is it October? This is crazy opening. Like first strikeout, it was like roaring crowd, like standing over. It was like incredible. And with the bad weather, a lot of folks did dip out, or they were in line for the merch because everyone needed a sweatshirt. And next door to Wrigley Field, connected to it actually, is the DraftKings Sportsbook. And there it was also packed. And so I am sitting and listening to people, and as I'm ear hustling, I'm kind of thinking about like, what does this mean about how I have that like chills, like literally cold, but also like, oh my gosh, Cubs fans, this is amazing. As a non-Cubs fan, I was like, this is kind of incredible. And then I was in the sports book and had a completely different experience. And the sports book itself is very tiny. The rest of it feels like sports bar. But I think there's something about the way that we talk about sports and the way that sports journalists have had to like work into this, where some of the pastoral, romantic, or the ways that it's generationally handed down, our fandoms, our heartbreak, like, I just sometimes feel like my kids are not getting their hearts broken. This builds character. Like, be a fan of a bad team. Like, they're just like, I follow players and I follow the spread. And I'm like, be vulnerable. You know, like this is like this crisis of vulnerability.
You
Right?
raise this, and Chris, I'd be curious what your perspective is here. Like, I remember when like ESPN or even the broadcasts would be so hesitant to mention what the opening line was. Yeah. Right? There would be talks of like when the broadcasters would, it was like we broke a fourth wall in some way when you would be watching a football game and it said this team opened as like 3.5-point underdogs as a, like, are we opening the dam to like gambling and sort of that, and now I'm sure there will be talks about, well, you know, that home run that we just saw, like so many parlays would have been broken by this, or this is like, you can look at the odds live now, and I wonder if you've noticed this trend. Is it sort of a slowly and then all at once type of situation, or?
The line has gotten real blurred real fast. And I mean this genuinely, is not just the parlays and the actual act of betting, but we're talking about Jonte Porter was a basketball player for the Toronto Raptors. Brother of Michael Porter Jr. trying to get his way into the NBA. All of a sudden, he's found to just take part in point shaving and gambling in that way, gambling on himself. And that's a no-no. And that's when you talk about Pete Rose, he was also ostracized right away, out of the league. And it struck a chord because, to kind of piggyback off of what Matt just mentioned, being as journalists, we cannot bet. We are not allowed to bet on live sporting events because that conflict of interest right there. Because if I'm betting on Michigan to win the Final Four, then I might slant coverage towards them. That's just where the thought process comes from. And that makes total sense. But it really starts to get murky when you have, hey, this is Jonte Porter, who was just suspended from the NBA for betting, brought to you by FanDuel. And that's the part where I sit back and I'm like, what happened to the line and where is it? I want to know where it is, because if we're taking money from betting websites to talk about how bad betting is, are we going to eventually talk about, maybe take a step back of like, hey, gambling sometimes can become an addiction. And that's something that we need to open and talk about. You always have to have this, though, if you have an addiction, call the number. And that's the thing. And even then, like, I've seen people use that as a punchline of like, hey, if you're betting on, you know, the Freeport Pretzels Independent League Baseball, call the number, which it's like, it's a joke, but it's also like, we can't really minimize that to the point where that can really be a destructive thing. And it's such an interesting line and such a hard line to recognize these days too, especially since when we talk about stories that I've written and stories that others have written that USA Today, a lot of bigger content generating services will create of, what's the line? Now, who comes up with that? And it's the betting lines that are come up with in Vegas and everything like that too. And it's difficult. It's difficult to rationalize that, because even myself, when I was writing a story once and getting ready to do something for the Chicago Bears, and here's slotted into our social media, this is something that's going to post on Facebook at 7 o'clock is, click here for more on Fox Bet. And I'm like, ooh, yikes. It's somewhere, the line has been drawn somewhere, and I think we're all still looking to find it. And I think in journalism, especially in daily journalism, that's also a concern. I don't know where it is, and I would like to find it.
So I'll say something that I tell my students. Again, I teach a lot of statistics and data science and machine learning types of classes. We got all sorts of data. We got all sorts of really powerful predictive models. The number one question I get asked is, so can I do some modeling to help me with my bets? And the answer is like an unequivocal no. You are not going to beat these sports books over the long run. They now have the ability that if you are appearing to be pretty good, they'll just rate limit you. So if you have been using DraftKings or FanDuel and it's been 6, 7, 8 months, they are just taking your money. And like, whatever system you've got, I promise you, it's not working if they're still letting you bet. So that's the usual disclaimer I have to give in every one of my classes now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Rapid fire, real question, or a rapid fire question, follow-up, because you said we are talking a lot about gambling. And that's taking up all that space. If we're not talking about gambling, what should we be talking about regarding sports and data analytics?
I mentioned it before. This past weekend, with the women's Final Fours, one of the best Final Fours in history. Obviously, the two Final Fours that included Caitlin Clark and LSU in South Carolina, those are the ones at the top because of just the star power that they had in those 2 weekends. But that is carrying over. That's still carrying over, and I think we're starting to see that carry over in viewership with WNBA, but also pointing out things like college volleyball. That's become such a big thing that this upcoming fall, Nebraska, Mizzou, Penn State, and I can't remember the other team are hosting. Sorry about your. Wisconsin's not involved, unfortunately. They're playing volleyball at Wrigley Field. But they have such a big enough audience that they
Just
are
got that
coming.
email.
Fantastic, right?
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. And it's one of those where these sports are growing so exponentially. And I've always thought they were a powder keg, even back in 2022 when the Las Vegas Aces were winning WNBA championships with stars like Asia Wilson, where we're like, people are watching this. And you can downplay like, oh, it was only X amount of viewers. But like, the numbers are exponentially growing and consistently growing to the point where all of these things are powder kegs. And if you notice these analytics to the point where, well, how do we specifically make it pop? And we have by showcasing the stars, the Angel Reeses and the Cameron Brinks and all these athletes that we know of that are household names. And that right there is what I think of. It's these sports that are growing because we've put them in a position to blow up. They have always been powder kegs, but now they're in a better position more than any.
I think Samir and I are kindred spirits in that we both don't necessarily use AI and some of those tools in our workflows, but I think we'd be naive if we didn't mention it on this panel. And I think some of the most powerful use cases I have seen, the Twins, for example, they have basically built a thread where they've fed it a variety of biomechanics papers related to arm injuries, workload management. And so after a pitcher starts, let's say like Joe Ryan starts, or last year Griffin Jacks when he was still in the Twins bullpen, they would feed all of the biomech information. So Samir mentioned biomechanics, but for those who don't know, it's basically a marker or a markered system. If it's a markerless system, it's captured at Fenway, at Wrigley. If it's a markered system, they have to be in their underwear, and you put little dots all up and down their body. You can't have somebody pitch at Wrigley in their underwear, so they designed this like markerless system. And so it collects all of this information, right? Like where you release the ball, the way that I generate momentum with my torso, all this really powerful information. And so rather than just having a biomechanist on staff, the Twins will basically feed the information, and then it will flag, oh, Joe Ryan dropped his arm in the back half of his start today. And so that's an important thing to know because it might be related to Joe Ryan being fatigued, or he's not generating enough momentum down the mound. There's actually a hitch in his delivery, and we're able to pinpoint it. And so rather than the biomechanist or the Twins pitching coach taking like an hour after the game, that can happen instantly. And so from a front office perspective, when there's an opportunity cost to everything that you do, I think from again, to use the umbrella concept of AI, the amount of hours that you can save and then reallocate elsewhere are really powerful. And I think one of the next frontiers is these tools are going to be used, but how are they optimized by the front offices in question?
I love that you went into thinking about women's basketball, obviously very near and dear to my heart. Obviously, when I started my research in 2015, very different landscape than what we see today. I think there's a lot of reasons. I obviously think about labor and legal things a lot in my brain. So I think about the Kaplan report, like it's not Caitlin Clark, it's the fact that the NCAA was keeping itself from greatness because of the sexism. And so I really appreciate that of like how we get to tell the stories, of the fact that you were fighting for those stories even then. And so I'm appreciative for folks like you. I think this is the time where I'm gonna pitch, no pun intended, a conversation about ABS. Because not thinking about any kind of robo-officiating or challenges that we now do in sport as changing, there's interesting conversations about how much of this changes sport. the feel of sport, the human element of sport, human error in sport as being indicative of what we expect, how we strategize around that. You kind of were talking about that too. I'm thinking about catchers, but I think I just want to read 2 headlines. So I want to think about how people understand the technology as being the thing I think is one of the most interesting things. So ABS I think is interesting as a concept, the technology, but there was a Ringer headline from yesterday by Lex Pryor that says, accountability culture is dead, ABS is the exception. Okay, so that's one. Jason Williams wrote in the Cincy Inquirer, CB Bucknor needs to go, so does MLB's ABS. And so I love that there are these 2 kind of things, and CB Bucknor is the umpire that's just not loving ABS. He got hit by a ball recently. He's just having a bad week. And so one of the things I want to think about is if we can have this automated system that one person says, we live in a culture where we can't hold our politicians accountable, we can't hold our bosses accountable, no one seems accountable, the person that ghosted us on a dating app, we can't hold anyone accountable anymore, and ABS feels like, he's writing like, I'm writing from a hater's perspective. I like every single umpire that's gotten caught, right? There's every time we get this sweet justice. And I love that piece because it's both tongue in cheek, but it's also indicative of like why it feels so good when it's like, yeah, they were wrong. Or when you see, if you're watching NBA, right, when they have to say, okay, it's been challenged, it's been overturned. Like they have to admit they were wrong. And there's something nice about someone having to say they were wrong and us remedying that in the moment. So that's what challenges and what the ABS system might give us. But on the other side, Jason Williams is writing from a perspective of thinking about how we start to question officials. Who's going to want to be an umpire, right? If we see the vitriol that's kind of hurled their way. And so he's writing from a perspective of also seeing it at the youth sports level. If youth sports are starting to see it and there's this big question of like, can we trust these officials? I think it's really interesting where he's like, hey, you can both be bad at your job and need to be held accountable, but also this is changing the structure of how we think about officiating. And so I'm more interested in how technology facilitates these conversations. And that just that tingles in my brain really well. But it also reminds me, come on, media studies, communication, sports journalism, of how when we first started to televise baseball, we had the same fears. They were afraid that because the quality of the cameras, of what we were able to see, there were people that were writing op-eds like, we can't televise, all these extra cameras being brought into baseball, we will never trust Major League Baseball officiating, right? So these panics, it also reminds me, are not new. These are the same kind of panics and logics of like, technology's gonna come in and change the game. No one will go to baseball games, or no one will watch this, or no one will trust officials. And so I like connecting in these parallels about technology and how it changes over time, because it's the same conversations.
I want to piggyback on like ABS specifically. I think, I think Major League Baseball has a lot of good going for it, but I would never think of Major League Baseball as innovators in any real sense of the word. I will say, and credit where credit's due, when they rolled out ABS, I think they did a great job with communicating it to the viewer. The product on television is compelling. Mm-hmm. The little box, the little trajectory, highlighting it, they nailed that. Because there's a way to do it like the NBA, where we're going back to New York, we're just gonna kind of sit here for 30 seconds and get to a decision. But I think they really like hit it out of the park, to strain a metaphor, right? It really like was a success story for kind of building a broadcast product and rolling in a lot of the technology. And I think the players took it in stride, and I think it was, the first week, there were a bunch of challenges in the first few days, and I forget who it was, but 3 times setting the bottom of the strike zone. Who was in that first week? We'll figure this out later. Yeah, the player. But it was just, I think it makes for compelling television. But to really get at your thing, that like last headline, the last big thing I would say is, one of the benefits of analytics, I think writ large, is it's opened the door into sports for just a huge number of people that would not otherwise be able to work in sports. There's now, I work with a lot of undergraduates, and their dream job is to go work for the Packers or for the Brewers or for the Bucks. And a lot of them might have played youth sports, but they certainly aren't playing college sports. They're not doing athletic training. They're not studying sports management. They're studying computer science. They're studying data science. They're studying English. And they want to know, how do I work in sports? And I think analytics, because it's new, because it's kind of sexy, because there's a movie with Brad Pitt in it, people kind of understand that it's a thing. Teams are investing in it. Teams are hiring like crazy in it. it has just opened the door. And I think what we're going to start to see is we already have assistant GMs at teams coming out of analytics shops. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we're going to see a GM in the next 10 years coming from an analytics background, from a sort of a data-driven background, from a technical background, which is like very non-traditional. And you look at analytics departments, they're some of the most diverse and kind of eclectic group of people, and I think that's just a net benefit. So using analytics as a doorway into this industry and this sort of world that people who love sports but never had an opportunity to do it, or like to work professionally in it, I think that's just incredible, and kind of why like doubling down on analytics is such a good idea.
It's cool when you mention just creating new jobs and new spaces, especially for all that, because just talking about this just made me think of a little bit. Last weekend at the Final Four, they had the press conference for the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame inductees. Candace Parker was inducted. Her brother, Anthony Parker, played at Bradley. There's a connection there. But one of the most fun conversations I had all weekend was with Joey Crawford, his former NBA ref, very known for his demonstrative calls, ejecting Tim Duncan when he was sitting on a bench. One of the most fantastic conversations I've had. It was so fun because he was just so enlightening. And I asked him, like, what do you think about reffing in present day? And he mentioned this when he was in the press conference, and I asked him about it on the side, and he said, it's obviously you can't ignore the fact that being a referee comes with the bad press. Obviously, it's difficult. It's difficult because everybody thinks it's your fault when you're just doing your job. And I asked him, what do you think about it in the present day? And he said, I think refereeing in the NBA has never been better. And it was interesting because he mentioned we have a school where we teach referees and we show them examples, and then it makes me start to think, well, what's the ABS version of the NBA? It makes me think, what's the VAR for out of bounds plays? And maybe there's an opening for that, or like we talked about it before, where if you have the probability of getting calls right, that's part of the storyline, especially for a journalist, where you're thinking, hey, well, Matt LaFleur only gets challenges right 48.6% of the time, and you've taken that into account, especially when you're telling a story. So that's a part of the future I'm really interested in, and especially with someone like Joey Crawford saying those things, knowing that's a guy that's been at the center of a lot of controversial calls.
Yeah. There's a guy, Connor, shout out to Connor, that does a lot of the video and analytics stuff for the University of Texas women's basketball. And he's like 100% on challenging calls. Oh, wow. So if Connor tells Coach Schaefer, we need to challenge that, you challenge it. And so they are starting to tell the story during the games. I went to UT, I'm a Longhorn. I watched every single women's basketball game this past season. And one of the things, you'll see him, even when I went to Moody and saw a game in person, when you see Connor get up, you're like, we're challenging that. 100%, I mean, he is like on it, and the way that he's able to quickly do that, I mean, he should work for a major, he's too big for Texas, but I love him. But I think there's something interesting about that as a new position, where it's like I know Connor's name, and every time they cut to him, I'm like, look, he's standing up, we're doing it. And it's like there's something interesting about, you love, I think there's so many jobs in sports and sports media, and there's so many people that just don't know where their talent lies, because we see a couple of positions, right? And we see someone in front of the camera, we see someone holding the camera, we see a coach, but there are so many opportunities, and as you mentioned, there's so many happening. All the jobs that I had at ESPN were not jobs that I would have even known to apply. Like, I had to get there and see it. And so I think there's such a great opportunity at this so-called best communication. I love this. You got to brand this is branding, right? We learned this earlier today, right? But I think there's something so rich about that, about all the different ways that we can bring skill to sport. And I think that this is some of the great openings. You could be Connor. Connor, I don't know Connor just knows. Like, when he sees it, there's something powerful about that. Or you want to tell a story in a particular way. You want to tell a story through numbers. And so I love the idea of you training stats folks to let's tell a story. Like, what is the story? That I think is really beautiful.
Oh, my top of my head just went, this is so much fun. Okay, so last one, I'm sorry, real quick. Who is doing it right? Katie, you had mentioned, I think, the New York Yankees. But what organizations do you all feel have that Connor-like focus? They're using analytics the right way. Who's doing it the right way?
Yeah.
I think What the Dodgers and Yankees have done, and Samir and I were speaking about this earlier, is they've basically extracted the best practices and principles from the Rays, from the Cleveland Guardians, and then married that with pretty like astronomical budgets, right? Like if you look at the Dodgers roster, and it's Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Kyle Tucker, right? None of those players are homegrown. None of those players necessarily benefited from the R&D department that they have in place, but they win on the margins, and then if and when they make poor signings or trades don't work out or guys go on the IL, they have the ability to backfill, like they have redundancy. So I would say, you want to give credit to the Rays and to Cleveland for doing things on a shoestring budget in comparison maybe to the Angels and the Rockies, right? Like you can juxtapose those two groups. But in terms of the advantages, like now you have large market teams with large market budgets who have the mentality of arbitrage and making the 52 versus 48% right decision. And so that's where they're winning. But you have like 5 Hall of Famers on your roster. Like it's very difficult for the Kansas City Royals to compete with that.
I think I'm in a unique spot. So I did a lot of my PhD training at a time when if you were a statistician and you were interested in sports, you kind of just did it as a side project on top of your dissertation and wrote a blog about it or wrote a paper about it, and then you went on with your day job. But what happened was people started getting hired by teams, and a lot of my friends ended up working for teams. A lot of them ended up being very successful. And so I don't think I can answer that question without betraying the confidence of a lot of personal relationships and like free tickets. So, we're gonna, I'm gonna dodge, but what I will say is because they're not working for a team, I think a lot of credit, and when we look back at sort of in 10 or 15 years about where analytics is, I think we'd be remiss if not to tell the story of Mike Lopez at the NFL. So Lopez was a stat professor, and he got a job at the NFL doing a lot of data stuff, and in his first year, he created a contest, the Big Data Bowl, where he released a little bit of the player tracking data to the public. And this is like a major organization. The NFL is not really it's a very conservative, very kind of risk-averse organization, and they released their data to the public and asked them to do something interesting with it. And over the last 8 or 10 years, this has turned into a marquee event of the Combine, where people who every year they release some data, ask people to do a project, and invite some people to go and present to teams. And it's turned into a talent identification pipeline. People get jobs hired basically on the site from that event. And it's just built, I think, 70 or 80 people over the last 8 years have gotten jobs in sports, whether it's football, whether it's basketball, whether it's soccer. And I think a lot of credit and a lot of the talent pipeline that's being built up that the Dodgers and the Yankees are gobbling up is due to Lopez and for creating that and creating the space to do that. So I think that's the one I would put an underline with. He's going to get so mad at me for saying all this.
We are up against it. And I cannot express enough my gratitude to this panel. And just the fact that, how cool is it here that we have been able to spend time with these experts, nationally recognized experts, their voices, and they talked about the things that they care about, they feel passionately about. And this is the really cool part. You may be sitting there and thinking, hey, I want to be one of those conduits. I want to be someone that helps to explain to a coach or explain to my readership or the audiences what all of these different things mean. And so if I can do that, or if I can work in sports, I'm going to be successful. I want you to look at these folks and understand that when we reached out to them and said, hey, would you come and share what you know and your experience and so forth with a bunch of undergraduates at Bradley University, immediately, every single one said, yes, I'll do it. I'm happy to be there. Katie, when we had a last-second cancellation, I said, hey, would you mind, serving double duty on another panel? She said, absolutely. I'm ready to go. That right there, to me, is the greatest mark or indicator of success. That when someone asks you to come back and share what you know with other people, you don't even hesitate. So my admiration and gratitude to each one of you. Thank you so much.